for the event. Um, uh, Welcome to our last Psychology Day talk. Our larger theme has been psychology and media, and we are looking forward to a talk by two representatives who teach in the English department. And so I wanted to at least briefly introduce our speakers. Charles E. Richard is a Joseph P. Montiel BORSF professor of English. Mr. Richard received his MFA from LSU. He's a noted nonfiction writer whose work includes books, essays, and films. He has produced over 24 documentary films with several prestigious awards. He teaches creative writing and Louisiana literature and is one of the English department's specialists in cinema studies. We also have Conni Castille, a senior instructor in moving image arts. Conni received her MA from the University here of Louisiana at Lafayette. She has written, directed, and produced several award-winning documentaries on Cajun and Creole culture that have been supported by the Louisiana Division of the Arts and the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. She teaches courses on introduction to filmmaking and documentary filmmaking. I think that you hear a common theme in their expertise, and I think that makes it a natural fit that, of course, they are presenting together. So I am looking forward to listening in on this, and I welcome you. Again, you honor us by being here. Take it away.
I'll start and say that, my first thought when I learned that we could have others joining us and do this as a team, there was nobody else to choose except Conni. Conni and I have been working together really since I arrived here at UL, and we've made a number of documentary films together, and we still work together. We have a project that we're working on now, and she can tell you about that or anything else. But I think what we said that we were going to talk about is the notion of truth in media, especially in documentary film, since that's the primary form of nonfiction on the screen. There are several different ways of doing documentary, but the lead off that I want to start with is that one thing that I think people misunderstand about documentary is in their expectations of its capacity to tell the truth. So truth, anytime you talk about truth, it's going to be a slippery subject. But the thing that I want to stress here at the beginning is that there is no such thing as an unmediated, unfiltered truth in documentary film. There's no such thing as a truth without a point of view, in other words. So a lot of the nonfiction storytelling that we find in documentary, I think sometimes it's easy to forget, especially in the past when we were really just a mass media culture before the rise of interactive media and online and so forth. We were just simply passive consumers, and we tended to look at documentary as communicating the truth about a subject. But it's a lot more complicated than that. Naturally, as documentary filmmakers, Conni and I always strive to be as thoroughly accurate and truthful as we can be within the limitations of the medium. And the medium just has those natural limitations. Everything from the camera angle that you choose to the way that you edit the film, the things you choose to leave out, the kind of music that you might use to support the film, the interview subjects that you select. All of those things are a filtering through a filmmaker's point of view. So this is not to say that you're getting dishonest material, but it's important to remember that the filmmaker is the filter through which the audience receives the information. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. Good. Conni, I don't think we can hear you.
Good luck. Come back in.
I can tap dance for a while. So I think when Connie comes back, she's going to be talking about some of the different modes of documentary filmmaking. And this is the book that we're kind of drawing from here. It's a very, very useful introduction to documentary film. It's a textbook that I have used when teaching documentary film in the past. It's simply called Introduction to Documentary, and it's written by Bill Nichols. And Bill Nichols identifies 5 or 6 different modes of documentary filmmaking, right? Different ways of telling the truth using this medium. So like the first one is probably the kind of documentary film that most people are most familiar with. It's called the expository mode. And that's kind of the Ken Burns and PBS style of documentary filmmaking. It's the mode that I most often have been operating in because most of my films have been for PBS. And so the expository mode is one that is kind of like think of it as like a creative research paper, right? You tend to appeal to authority, experts for your interview subjects. You get a lot of talking heads, right? Commenting on a topic, authorities and experts. It's heavily researched and often narrated, uses a lot of archival footage, and is mostly about information, right? It's not necessarily really about moving your audience emotionally, although it can do that. It's really, as the name suggests, it's about exposing the audience to the topic and the relevant information about it. Connie, can you? Nope, still nothing? Do you want to come next door? Okay. All right. Well,
Are you guys in the same building?
we're actually right next door to each other. And I was saying, if Connie wants to come in my office and join me, we could do that.
I would love to hear from her.
Okay. The joys of working with Zoom. You would think that after what, 2 years of pandemic, it would all come so easily and naturally, but it doesn't.
No, weekly I have some crisis with my Zooming somewhere.
Yeah. I think Connie is coming here just a second.
Awesome.
So that's the expository mode of documentary. Does anybody have any questions about that? Like I said, if you want a good picture of what expository looks like, think about Ken Burns or your typical PBS documentary. There's Connie. You may want to turn your mute it. Yeah, there we go. Let me get you a chair.
Okay. Hi, y'all. I'm going to, I had everything opened on my laptop. Now I have to open it here. If you give me a second, so we can show you an illustration of what an expository documentary kind of looks like.
Take a seat. Hold on just a second. Or what do you want to do?
I'm going to Google.
Oh, okay, good. All right. And you can share screen once you have the examples.
Right. How do you,
Where do you want to do?
Scroll down.
You just have to use.
Oh, you have to use that. Okay. All righty. I apologize, y'all. We were so prepared. We rehearsed everything. And here we are. A little frustrating.
In my experience, it's always more frustrating for the speakers. I I think people are very understanding, about.
Good.
Thank you.
So where are you guys? Here you guys. So we'll share screen. Did I do it?
I think so. Yeah, I can't tell.
No, I don't think
Nope.
so. Oh, yeah, we're shared. So do you see the PBS website on here?
Yes, okay, good.
So some of the elements that you'll see, you'll have what we call talking heads.
Mhm.
That's kind of a distinction, or the voice of God sometimes. Narrator. Sometimes who the narrator is, and it might be connected to the story. Sometimes it's just because it's a Morgan Freeman voice and it just sounds so good. Heavy on archival. Did you already go over all
I
this?
did talk
Okay.
a little bit about this.
Okay.
One of the things about a expository documentary is that it projects a sense of authoritative knowledge, right?
Mhm.
So there's a heavy emphasis, like Connie said, on sort of this voice of God kind of narrator delivering information to you, and occasionally cutting away to headshot interviews, like Connie said, talking heads, that are experts.
Right, they could be historians usually. But another cool thing Ken Burns does is he animates his stills. So if, let's say it's a letter from a Civil War soldier, he'll get someone from the same region to match the accent and the age, and read that letter, right? So you, in addition to your narrator, you might hear things like that. And I believe in this clip that we're going to watch, he does that as well.
Can everybody see this okay?
We can't see.
Oh,
I can stop sharing.
that's okay. No.
Okay. But let's, if there's a problem, just chat to us, okay?
They say that the British cannot fix anything properly without a dinner, but I'm sure the Americans can fix nothing without a drink. If you meet, you drink. If you make acquaintance, you drink. If you close a bargain, you drink. They drink because it's hot. They drink because it's cold. If successful in elections, they drink and rejoice. If not, they drink and swear. They begin to drink early in the morning. They leave off late at night. They commence it early in life, and they continue it until they soon drop into the grave. Captain Frederick Marriott.
For most of the nation's history, alcohol was at least as American as apple pie. The hold of the Mayflower, the ship that carried the first Puritans to Massachusetts, was filled with barrels of beer. At Valley Forge, George Washington did his best to make sure his men had half a cup of rum every day and half a cup of whiskey when the rum ran out. John Adams began each day with a tankard of hard cider. Thomas Jefferson collected fine French wines and dreamed of a day when American vineyards could match them. After Andrew Jackson's inauguration, so many drunken admirers crowded into the White House, the celebration had to be moved out onto the lawn to save the furniture. Young Abraham Lincoln sold whiskey by the barrel from his grocery store in New Salem, Illinois. Intoxicating liquor, he later remembered, was used by everybody, repudiated by nobody. A young Maryland slave named Frederick Douglass said whiskey made him feel like a president, self-assured and independent. Physicians recommended whiskey and cider and brandy and rum and beer as far better for their patients than water hauled from muddy rivers and stagnant pools. Clergymen drank, so did craftsmen and canal diggers, and the crowds of men who turned out for barn raisings and baptisms, funerals and elections. and public hangings.
It's part of ritual celebrations. It's part of being social. It's part of the gathering. And it's always been there. It just tells you something. Maybe we'll never really have an answer for why we need it. But if you look at the history, it's clear we do.
Americans routinely drank at every meal, including breakfast. In many towns, a bell rang twice a day to signal what was called grog time, so that men could stop whatever they were doing in factories and offices, mills and farm fields to raise a jug.
In farm families in New England particularly, that there was a barrel of cider by the door, and you came in and you would have your ladle of cider. Now, this wasn't as powerful as whiskey, but it wasn't the kind of cider that we have with donuts today.
For thousands of years, human beings had been fermenting fruits and grains to create mildly intoxicating beverages. But by the 1800s, rum, whiskey, and other distilled spirits with significantly higher alcohol content had become increasingly available.
All of a sudden, you have all of these people growing grain, growing corn, growing oats, growing wheat that can be distilled into whiskey. And so all of these rituals that had been part of the human experience, where farmers would get up and you would have beer with breakfast and beer with lunch and beer with your afternoon break and beer with dinner, but you're talking about 2% beer. But now all of a sudden people are drinking whiskey instead. And it took a while for the culture to recognize that, wait a minute, there's something really wrong here.
By 1830, the average American over 15 years of age drank the equivalent of 88 bottles of whiskey every year, 3 times as much as their 21st century descendants drink. Americans spent more money on alcohol each year than the total expenditures of the federal government. Inebriates filled the nation's poorhouses and workhouses and prisons. More and more, people began to worry that the country was becoming a nation of drunkards. And as the wages of many husbands and fathers and sons went to the grog shop, women and children became victims, mistreated, abandoned, deprived of food and shelter.
Alcohol consumption at that point was a sign of masculinity that took away masculinity. So that you drank to show that you were a man, but you get drunk and all of a sudden you can't provide for your family, you can't do your job, you become violent. There are so many references to the degradation of Saturday night. Implicit that a man would go out, first of all, he would leave the home, he would go to a saloon, he would get drunk, and he would come home and do whatever he wanted. This is a time when there's no divorce, when the concept of police protection for domestic violence doesn't exist. The concept of marital rape can't be discussed. But you can discuss it through alcoholism and what alcohol does to men.
Yeah, so that's an example of, classic example really, of expository filmmaking. You have a well-known narrator, I think that's Peter Coyote, right?
I don't know.
I think that's Peter Coyote. And of course, Ken Burns has developed his own defining way of creating expository documentary. But it's the same concept that you'd find across the board for, I'd say, the vast majority of documentaries that people watch, especially on television and so forth. It's a means of communicating information. In a way, it's a little bit like a picture book, really. It's a way of illustrating a story. But there are other modes as well. There's the observational mode, right? Which in France they called cinema verite or true cinema. I think in the US we tend to call it direct cinema. This is something that started really coming about in about the 1960s is really when observational documentaries really came about. And that's due to technological changes. So no longer did filmmakers have to carry around huge, enormous pieces of camera equipment and sound recording equipment, all of that stuff had been miniaturized, right? And so you had the rise of handheld cameras and audio recording equipment that you could carry on a shoulder strap. And so filmmakers were able to go to the scenes themselves and record things as they happen. Frederick Wiseman, who did a really famous documentary series called 7 Up, in which he traced the lives of young people over 7-year periods to observe their development and how they changed. And he also did films about life in prison and factories and so forth. But the thing that really distinguishes that kind of observational documentary is that there is no narrator. There's no voice of God telling you how to interpret the images that you're seeing. There are no cutaways to experts trying to give you facts or tell you how to interpret what you're seeing. It really is an attempt at being a form of direct capturing of reality. And that was just made possible by the changes in technology. Now, when it came about, it was very trumpeted as, you know, this is true filmmaking. This is something, a way to capture the truth. And that's a little misleading too, because as I said, the filmmaker is the one making the choices of where to point the camera or what to record, who to portray in the documentary and who to leave out. It's a series of many, many choices that the filmmaker makes. And those two exert a certain point of view. Even though observational documentary filmmakers like to portray this as a pure direct capture of reality, it's really not. There's an exercise of point of view at work in that too. So I think we have a sample of a cinema verite documentary or direct film, if you want to look at it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And
The best seller.
I think we need to share screen.
I will.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to get it first.
It's the greatest piece.
All right. And, you know, I mean, when filmmakers do their job very, very well, they, all of the tools kind of behind the curtain, if you will, go unnoticed. So the editing, the musical score, the camera movement, the camera angles, the shot types, but all of those things affect the audience.
Yeah, they're
emotionally.
commentary. They are a form of commentary in their own way.
And so when we look at this, this style, this observational, it's got several names: fly on the wall, direct cinema, all of this. The idea was that you wouldn't edit. You'd have long takes. And in other words, we are not manipulating what you're seeing by edit, right? So using the cinematic tools to almost kind of to deceive.
Yeah, to give a
if you
greater,
will.
yeah, to give a greater appearance of objectivity than perhaps actually exists.
Right, right. So we'll just watch a little bit of this. We won't watch it all, but this is the Maisel brothers, salesman. And we'll just watch the intro. Basically, they're Bible salesmen going door to door as you would sell encyclopedias,
Mhm.
same sort of idea. What's that?
I was going to say, the kids probably have no idea what we're
What an
talking about.
encyclopedia is.
Yeah, they used to go door to door and sell collections of encyclopedias or Bibles. And this documentary is basically just documenting a salesman in his work.
Right. This is before internet, guys.
It's really tremendous. Isn't it?
The shepherds and 3 kings right into Egypt, the childhood of Jesus. Mary turns there, Mary finds Jesus in the temple. Well, you can see how this would be an inspiration in the home. You like that, honey? What's in there? Well, she's as bright, she's pretty like a mother, huh? Christine, you know what my name is? Yes. Oh, you know? Oh.
You have a cousin.
Yeah. You can see how complete it is. The Bible runs as little as $49.95. And we have 3 plans on it. Cash, COD, also they have a little Catholic on the plan. Which plan would be the best for you? The A, B, or C?
I'm really not interested in
Yeah.
speaking of my head.
Yeah. You wouldn't want to give him a surprise. Did he have a birthday coming up? A lovely gift. He plays a tremendous. The Bible is still the best seller in the world, so.
I just couldn't afford it now. It's small, but not-
Oh, hi, Mr. Rob. Hey, Mr. McDevitt from the church. How are you today?
Now, what is this?
From the church, Sunday.
No, I guess you've got me mistaken. What name do you
Is
want?
this 59? Where's
No,
that?
across the street.
Oh, my gosh.
And this is for sale. And the crowd, they claim, I don't know exactly, but 30,000 or more attend one mass. They're right in St. Peter's.
St. Peter's.
Right in Nevada. I didn't know that myself.
I didn't think that.
You're Italian, aren't you, Mr. Nebrano? The guys are not Italian, they're Swiss. You
Yes,
know
that
why?
I know.
Did you know why? I never know this. They're 6 feet. See, they're taller than the Italian folks. You know, usually, see, they're 6 feet. Now, here's something nice. A lot of people, they like, to be frank, the print. It's large, it's a 10-point register. Isn't that something?
Good night, Noah. Thanks for the order.
So can everyone see the difference between the Ken Burns type of documentary and this one? It's an attempt to record reality. And like I said, it gives certainly a greater feeling of authenticity and maybe like objectivity, but it really isn't. It's kind of deceptive in that way because they're still telling a story and they're constructing that story out of images and recordings that the filmmaker selects and puts together in a certain order. Like the decision to cut to the child's face and the child playing on the piano and so forth. Those are decisions that the director makes. And those things influence how you see and interpret what's being communicated. Does anybody have any questions about that one? Okay, let's see. What is our next one?
Participatory.
Oh, right, participatory. Yeah, this is another mode. So we've talked about expository documentaries and observational documentaries. This one is called participatory, and it's just as the name suggests, where the filmmaker is a participant in the film, a participant in the story. They make no attempt to kind of conceal themselves the way that they do in expository, right? So in expository, you're supposed to forget that there's even a filmmaker there, right? But in participatory, it takes the opposite approach. It doesn't conceal the fact that the filmmaker has a point of view and is exercising that point of view in telling the story. And let's see, is there anything I've left out about that?
Well, it's like we're coming along with them on their journey of discovery. So we are with the camera in a way. They make you feel that way. So as the filmmaker discovers surprises, we're doing it in real time with them, basically. And probably,
I was gonna say, you'll immediately recognize this form as soon as we show you the sample and you'll go, oh, I get it. I get what participatory documentary is.
Meet Renee, bank manager and mother.
Just give us a second here.
so this is a trailer from one of the most renowned filmmaker of this style.
More, America's favorite whistleblower, the man in everyone's face, the guy asking the question, are we a nation of gun nuts or just plain nuts?
My name was second highest on the bomb threat list, which kind of made me mad because you didn't make it the number one. It's been kind of like an ego thing there, you know, knowing that I was number one at
Somebody. I loves my gun. Loves my gun.
I'm here to open up an account.
Okay, what type of
I
car?
want the account where I can get the free gun.
You do a CD and we'll hand you a gun.
Well, here's my first question. Do you think it's a little dangerous handing out guns in a bank?
Now he's taking aim at America's most controversial subject.
Why do you think we have so many gun murders in America?
Because everybody's first reaction is pull the gun out.
The town of Virgin, Utah has passed a law requiring all residents to own guns.
This is a great place to raise your children.
There has been a terrible shooting after Columbine. No one could figure out why the boys have resorted to violence.
Why would kids do this?
I don't think kids say dad goes off to the factory every day. He built missiles. What's the difference between that and the mass destruction of Columbine High School?
I guess I don't see that connection.
United Artists presents the sensation of the 2002 Cannes Film Festival and the only film to win a unanimous jury prize.
And then Moses himself showed up from my cold, dead hand.
10 days after the Columbine killing, Charlton Heston came to Denver and held a large pro-gun rally.
How could the NRA come here? To me, it's like they're rubbing their nose in it.
Mr. Heston, I'm a member of the NRA. I was wondering if maybe I could talk to you about the whole gun issue.
Critics are calling it scathing, incendiary, hilarious, and provocative.
Our children get turned into little monsters. But who was to blame?
What were the suspects doing the morning of attack? I heard that they were bowling.
For Columbine,
Why wasn't anyone blaming bowling for warping your minds?
a movie that will have you up in arms.
Thank you for not shooting me.
All right. So however you might feel about Michael Moore, he really exemplifies the idea of a participatory documentary. He makes no secret or concealment about his point of view, about the role that he's playing in telling the story. And although it's usually posited as a kind of exploration or a line of inquiry that he's following, there is definitely a point of view that's being asserted and put to work in his film.
Only a Metro by
So it doesn't hide anything.
And it doesn't take away that it's factual.
No,
You know,
not at all.
it's just that it's a different style altogether.
Yeah, that's the other thing is that I think sometimes people have a really distorted notion of what nonfiction means. I mean, nonfiction is really just telling a story made out of facts. Like Connie just said, I mean, Michael Moore's approach is no less legitimate. It's just, if anything, it's a little bit more upfront and honest. Yes, Morgan Spurlock, exactly. Yeah, thank you, Rick. He's another one who's very participatory.
Mm-hmm. And you want to do?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Let's do poetic next.
Okay, poetic.
That's what I have queued up.
Good. Yeah, so then there's stuff that's a little bit less common and maybe a little bit more unfamiliar to people. And that is a kind of poetic expression of truth in a documentary on screen. And so nobody will deny the fact that, you know, poetry tells its own kind of truth, appealing to the emotions, right? And combining images against each other to create a meaning that independently they don't have themselves. So you can take, the famous example is Alfred Hitchcock, the one that he gives. He says you can take 3 shots, one in which a man is smiling, and then you cut to a woman and her child, and he looks like a grandfatherly man smiling at the woman and her child. But if you take that same shot of the man the old man smiling, looking on, and instead you replace the shot of the woman with the child and put a woman in a bikini, suddenly he no longer looks like the friendly, happy grandfather. Instead, he looks like a leering, predator. So it's a lot. It has to do with how you put images together to generate meaning. And so poetic documentaries make extensive use of that kind of technique.
Okay, and now I'll share the screen again so we can watch an example of that.
I think it's going to be this one.
Oh, I'm moving the wrong one. All right, there we go.
Critics around the world have called it a remarkable film event, a breathtaking experience, a fusion of image and sound. Until now, you've never really seen the world you live in.
There we go. So, yeah, I don't know if anybody here has seen Conni Castille. Yeah, and so if you've seen it, you know that there's no narration, there's no interviews. It's simply images, right? Which is the basis of poetry. It's an appeal to imagistic ways of communicating truth. And so the name, we were just talking about it, it's been a long time since I saw it, but I think it's a Native American word that means out of balance. And so it's the juxtaposition of images of the modern world and modern life and the natural life in the desert. And it offers a profound and devastating commentary on modern American life without ever saying a word. And so that's an example of how filmmaking can be used to communicate poetic truth through imagery and sound and music, not through words. The reflexive, is that the one we're going to do next? Yeah, okay. And then the next mode that we have to talk about is the reflexive. Now, reflexive documentaries are very strange, I will admit, and they're kind of hard to understand. The best way to think of them, though, is that they are a very postmodern form of documentary filmmaking. They're very self-consciously aware of the fact that they are a constructed story. They are reflecting on the fact that it's a film, and it acknowledges that it's a film, and it acknowledges that it's being made. And it's kind of hard to understand except to simply say that that postmodern tendency to be self-reflexive in its work is also a form of documentary filmmaking. And the reason it's has its appeal, I think, is because in its own way, it is also an extraordinarily honest form of filmmaking. That's not to say it doesn't manipulate and so forth the way other forms of documentary do, but it is nevertheless maybe more upfront about what it's doing.
It's like in theater, you've heard the term breaking the fourth wall. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, it's like that. Breaking the fourth wall is a good analogy.
Where the form is the is apparent.
Yeah, it's more about the form than the content.
And I'll get the sample that we're going to watch, which is the most famous and the first, I would say.
Actually, this all is good.
Yeah.
The subtitles
Okay.
here.
Let me just get there then.
So this is a 1929 movie made by the Soviet filmmaker, what's his name?
Vertov.
Vertov, yeah. Experimental even for its time, and it remains, experimental even today.
Yeah, the Soviet Union took their filmmaking to a scientific level in the early days.
Yeah, they really did. People overlook the incredible contributions that the Soviets made. This film is an experiment. It was also from the silent film era. So when it says without the help of intertitles or the help of a story, it's just letting you know right up front what it's doing. No, I don't think there's any sound, but
the very first scene is the camera.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think you can imagine why this form of filmmaking has not been a big hit. But it points to something very important. This movie was made in 1929, and in those days, nonfiction film used sets, they used actors, they were staged, they had a screenplay. So probably the best known filmmaker from the documentary filmmaker from the silent era is who made Nanook of the North?
Robert Flaherty.
Robert Flaherty, thank you.
Yep.
Robert Flaherty was an early pioneer. In fact, he's called the father of documentary filmmaking. And most people have heard of the title of his most famous film, which was Nanook of the North. And he had spent a great deal of time in the Arctic Circle with Inuit peoples, and he wanted to capture the way of life that they lived. But the way he did that was what we would think of today as anything but nonfiction. So for example, we get shots of this Eskimo family wrapped in furs inside of an igloo, right? And they're trying to keep warm, and this is their home. So we're getting a shot of this family in their home. But in order to get this shot, because again, in those days, movie cameras were huge, right? What Flaherty did was he cut an igloo in half. And so that we're getting a cross section of their home and being able to see the people inside of it and so forth. Because inside an igloo, it's simply too dark to shoot with a camera in the 1920s. So documentaries were very much staged and scripted. Flaherty's other film, he was the first one to really document Louisiana. He had a 1948 film, I think, called Louisiana Story. And it was his attempt to document the way of life of Cajuns living in the Atchafalaya Basin and the advent of the petroleum industry. But we've interviewed, I think, no, maybe that wasn't one of our projects, but I did a documentary about that. And we talked to the actors, and they were actors, you know. Now they were very close. They lived very much the way of life that they were trying to represent in the film. So it's not exactly faked, but that's the most that people could do to tell nonfiction film in those days, right? They couldn't tell nonfiction stories the way we think of them today. And we would look at those today and say, oh, well, you can't stage a documentary. You can't script a documentary. You can't give actors a role. It has to be. That was what they could do, though, in that time. And so documentary film has evolved a great deal since then.
And I might add the Man with the Movie Camera that we just saw by Vertov. There was a lot of tension between, he came from a news background, and he felt that narrative film, fiction, was for the bourgeoisie, that was not how this new amazing tool called cinema should be used. So in a way, this reflexivity of bringing the awareness that you are watching something fabricated was a way to kind of stick it to them.
Yes, exactly. And it was very much a statement of opposition or a reaction against the way that film was being used in America, for example, where even our documentary films like Nanook of the North are actually fictional, you know. And so Vertov's effort here, even though I have to say it's not a very entertaining movie, it is an important one in the sense that it is honest about the process of creating nonfiction film. I think that's all of the modes we have.
Yeah, that's where we'll stop.
Okay. So I think now we can take questions. Anybody?
Yeah, what question? Welcome. I'm going to jump in with.
I think you're muted. Rick, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Oh no, we're muted.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
sorry, we were muted.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
We had muted y'all. Y'all could still hear us. Right?
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Had y'all been able to hear everything we were saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had just muted.
So,
okay.
I have a couple. I have like couple questions. One's more kind of like a little bit from a psychology angle, and then the other one's more from just critiquing your own expertise. I'll go with the psychology one first. I would imagine that being as experienced as both of you are with the creation of this art form and of teaching about it and relaying it, that this has transforms it completely transforms how you would consume the product. You know, when you're watching somebody else, that not only are you seeing it in the way that I would see it, but you're also noticing the techniques that you're using. You're noticing, oh, this is probably edited in this way, or oh, I noticed this cut in that particular way. And I guess like a question I'm asking about is, do you find that sort of awareness of the malleability of narrative, do you find that to intrude upon the way that you even experience non-cinematic narratives? You know, when you're watching the news or when you're hearing somebody tell a story about what happened, you know, part of the implications in my field might even be, you know, psychotherapists who are listening to their client telling a story, about the world. Have you found that the more that you know about this form of art, that it's changed, it has an impact on the way that you look at the larger context of reality and interactions?
How do you want to go first? Or?
Well, I don't know if we'll both just say, I'll say this. When I teach intro to film, the textbook that we use, it says looking at movies. So we discuss the difference between just watching a movie and looking at a movie, right? At the form and understanding that. And I compare it to, everyone reads novels, right? But once you decide you want to be a writer, you read differently. Now you're thinking about the tools that author had to bring the character to life, all of this stuff. So in a way, it enriches my media experience because I appreciate the form, and I can look at it both ways, for entertainment and for analysis, just the general form of media. As far as how it changed the way I look at news media or something like that. I mean, sure. I mean, I guess we understand the hidden tools, the cinematic language back there, and what's at their disposal, and how that affects an audience watching. So if they misuse that, or if they deploy those tools in the wrong way, in the sense that they're trying to get an agenda across that might be the opposite of what is true to the people in the story, then I would have a problem with that.
Yeah. And I think I agree with that. It certainly has changed the way I look at documentaries and other nonfiction media. On the one hand, it has enhanced my appreciation for a well-made and thoroughly honest documentary. But more broadly, I mean, I think it's my belief that narrative is the basis of culture and the basis of society, really. And that everything is made of story when you think of it that way, ideas and so forth. But it also makes me more mindful that there's always a storyteller, and that has to be taken into account. Who's telling the story? With what agenda are they telling this story? What are their motivations? What are their honesties and dishonesties in telling the story? So I'm not going to say it has given me a more skeptical view of the world, but I would say it does make me more conscious and maybe a little bit less naive than I used to be, because I know that there is no such thing as an unmediated truth to tell. There's always a storyteller behind it. I don't know if that addresses the question.
Yes. And my other thing, which is kind of related to this, and is I was wondering about your guys, what you guys had to say about this genre that is in our face all the time, that's sometimes referred to as reality television. and the sort of explosion of reality television over the last 20 years as the dominant form of programming.
I think, yeah, sure. I think at this point, I don't think that there are too many people, consumers of reality TV, that don't know how constructed it is, right? It's kind of like nobody watches pro wrestling and thinks that, it's actually, that there's an actual contest happening and so forth. Everybody understands that these things are staged. Now, in the early days, there was a great deal of interest in reality TV because, for whatever reason, Americans, there are reasons for this, but it'd take too long to go into it. Americans are devoted to non-fictional storytelling. They love that. And nonfiction has only grown as a medium as we go on. And so it had a lot of appeal in the early days because before people really started figuring out and seeing behind the curtain how reality TV was made, they had an appeal, right, of seeing real people supposedly and real situations supposedly, and it was compelling. But anybody who lives life knows that life doesn't work that way. You know, everything on reality TV is a construction. It's a fabrication. Other questions?
I think Dr. Charles, you have a question?
I just wanted to say to Dr. Richard, pro wrestling is real. You cannot convince me. WrestleMania just happened this weekend. It's real. Don't you dare tell someone from the South that pro wrestling, because we say wrestling.
Wrestling.
It is not, it's real, Dr. Charles. I just wanted to say that.
I appreciate that. I think if you close your eyes and clap your hands, it all becomes so real. That too is the form of narrative, though. I mean, that's all that pro wrestling is. It's a kind of kabuki theater, you know, of narrative, you know, and you have your hero, you have your villain, and sometimes those roles switch and all. It's actually quite fascinating. When I was in graduate school, I had a professor who was specialized in 18th century literature, but the thing that he loved writing about most and published a great deal about it is pro wrestling.
Dr. Charles, I'm gonna turn the mic over, but I love going behind the scenes. There are shows that are removing the curtain, and that was like taboo. I'm blanking out on the term that they use, but you could not talk about the scripted nature of wrestling. That was taboo, but it's an amazing thing. But again, pro wrestling is real.
Thank you.
Dr. McGivers?
Yeah, I just have to sort of jump in on and support Dr. Charles on this. No, actually, I once was interviewed about pro wrestling, and I said that in some ways pro wrestling is the Shakespeare of today.
Yeah.
It is a way of capturing stories that make people believe they're real and engage the populace, and it's what they want. And I'm not part of the people who love that, but you know, I'm willing to allow other people to enjoy that form of drama.
Well, one thing that I appreciate about pro wrestling very, very much is the fact that it gets at one of the most fundamental things that we learn about the art of storytelling, right? And it doesn't matter which medium we're talking about, whether it's film or written stories or oral storytelling and so forth. The one thing that's drilled into us from the beginning of learning the craft of storytelling is that the heart of all good stories is conflict, right? That without conflict, you don't really have a narrative. And there has to be struggle. There has to be, opposition to your main character for there to be a story. And wrestling, in a way, you know, really just kind of distills that stuff down into its most pure form of simplistic narrative.
I definitely have less of a problem with wrestling than some shows where it appears that in service of a dramatic narrative, they're putting real people in situations that are not healthy.
Yeah, I got to agree with you.
Celebrity Rehab. I once saw like episode of that where they get like these celebrities, are they being rehab? They have them in the same facility, and they had two people at this rehab facility who had a history where one of them had accused the other in the past of domestic violence, what was part of their history. And there was an actual licensed therapist, I think, who was, you know, part of the team, you know, and I don't even know what to call that, you know, at that point. It's definitely pure. Pro wrestling is so much more pure compared.
Well, it's exploitation. Yeah, and it really is exploitative filmmaking, right? You know, that's all that it is, and people get hurt, people get damaged in exploitation like that.
I do think that one of the things that drives some of this reality TV that's not reality is America's passion with being looky-loos.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to watch other people suffer. That's really cool stuff.
In film studies, we talk about something called scopophilia, the love of looking, right? And that voyeuristic tendency that accompanies any kind of screen narrative, right? So Alfred Hitchcock probably did one of the most, brought it to people's attention most with the movie Rear Window, which was all about that tendency toward voyeurism and the difficulty we have in looking away from somebody else's private drama. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's what filmmakers talk about when they talk about scopophilia.
If I can just add right quick, kind of the positive side when it comes to film, there's something special when someone can bring a story to life and you can connect with it. You know, there's beauty in that. It's like, man, I thought I was the only one, or I thought my family was the only family that was screwed up. And you sit back like, dang it, there are a lot of screwed up people in the world, you know? So I like how Rick brought up this exploitation, but I've had conversations with people, even within my family. It's like, you see, we do need to pursue help. We do need help in this family. So it's amazing how it could be good in a way and also bad in a way.
Yeah, it is complicated. It's like any other tool. It's just an extremely powerful tool. My personal favorite are movies that are based on real stories, right? And it attempts to tell a truthful story through drama. I really love those. And because when you watch them, you know that you're watching a constructed story that has a sometimes tenuous relationship with reality, but you can always go and explore and find out what those relationships are. But I really like what you had to say about the
Oh yeah, y'all remember Candid Camera, the very early on, you know, that had some, in hindsight, the ethical issues that arise from that.
Yeah, I mean, we all love Candid Camera. I don't know if the younger students will know about this show, but the premise of it was the filmmakers would go and set up a situation that an ordinary, unsuspecting person kind of walks into, and the camera records their hilarious reactions as they're like baffled or embarrassed or whatever it is. And so the filmmakers would engineer a situation in order to elicit a response from different ordinary people, and they'd capture it on camera, and it was called Candid Camera. And it was funny, but of highly questionable ethics.
Oh. Boy, there's so much I'd like to talk about. We're already, past 5, so we've actually gone so successful that we've gone over time here. Wow, I still have more things that I'd like to talk about, but to be fair to everybody who has been here and wants to go and have supper or something like that, I want to just thank you all. Thank you both for a wonderful thought-provoking. It makes me think a lot about just narrative in general and its applications and the way that different ways that it can be studied and examined. So I thank you all for attending. I hope that we have a chance to hear more and to interact more in the future. We are just across campus, so hopefully there'll be some opportunities to have some interesting discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take some of Connie's classes in documentary filmmaking if you're really interested, or check out some of her work. It's a lot of fun. Thank you.
My sister is not a documentary editor, but my sister is an editor by trade. She actually, there was once a fictional movie. I don't know if you heard this